Dear Black women, this podcast is a love letter to you all. This podcast is a space where we give you your flowers for making the world a better place for us all. This podcast is a space where you can take off your crown and the superhero cape and showcase your vulnerability. This is your time to get refreshed and poured into. Black women, you are loved. Black women, you are valuable. Black women, you are beautiful. Not just for all you do, but for who you are. Welcome to the Black Women Save the World podcast. I'm your host, Deidre Montague. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Black Women Save the World podcast. I'm your host, Deidre Montague, and this is our first episode. Super excited for our first guest of the podcast, Kim Janey. She is the president and CEO of Economic Mobility Pathways, better known as EMPATH, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families experiencing poverty dramatically improve their economic mobility. Prior to leading EMPATH, Kim Janey made history when she was sworn in as Boston's first woman and first Black mayor. For our first inaugural season, the theme is Trailblazers. Her resume of 30 years experience in the nonprofit sector, Kim Janey was the perfect guest to kick us off for our first season. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and thanks for tuning in. Enjoy. Well, thank you so much, Miss Janey. I guess my first question is, what was your childhood like? Were you a good child, or were you a rabble rouser? What type of child were you?
I like to think I was a so-called good child, whatever that means. I'm the firstborn in my family. I grew up here in the city of Boston, born and raised here into a large, loving family of educators, artists, entrepreneurs, and activists. I was shy as a little girl, venturing out into this big, big world. I remember my mom bringing me downtown Boston, and downtown Boston is nothing today what it was like as a child. And even as a young adult, it was nothing like it was as a child. Like as a child, literally shoulder to shoulder, walking down the street, because this is before there were these big shopping malls out in the suburbs. So everyone came into downtown Boston. And if they weren't going into downtown Boston, which was the number one shopping center, they were coming into my own neighborhood of Dudley Square, which is the second largest at that time, the second largest retail space, and even more so maybe in my parents' youth. I probably got the tail end of Dudley being a vibrant shopping center. We had a Woolworths there and a Robel's there. There was a furniture store at one time there. There was a supermarket there at one time there. But my childhood, I would say, is one we all kind of wax nostalgic when we reflect and we think back to the good old days and how kids today are missing the mark. But I literally did grow up at a time and in a neighborhood where all the adults knew you. It was that kind of sense of community. And whenever we would visit my great grandmother's house in the South End, the street was just overrun with children. Today, you see streets that are overrun with cars and other things, but it was the childhood games of Foursquare or Double Dutch, playing tag. Those are the wonderful things that I think about when I reflect on my childhood. I also experienced some really tough things. We grew up very poor. I was bused as a kid during the desegregation era of busing in Boston with the Garrity order. And so there were a lot of tough things in my childhood as well, but I am certainly grateful for all of the experiences that I've had that have led me to where I am today.
That's amazing. I love that you had that sense of community of everyone knowing each other. That's so amazing to have. I would love to know, is there a favorite story that you have of childhood that you could share with us?
I have so many. They tend to be centered around family. So when I think of going to my Nana's house here in Boston, this is my dad's mom. She had 7 children, and all of her kids had a lot of kids. And so whenever we were at Nana's house, just so many cousins, again, that outdoor play, knowing the kids in the neighborhood. Another favorite memory is of my other grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived in Connecticut, in Bloomfield, Connecticut, and going to visit in the summer was magical. It was absolutely magical. She lived in a suburb outside of Hartford. And at this time, this is the 1970s, it is very rural, not even suburban. It is lots of pastures, lots of horses and cows, and the ice cream parlor in the center of town. It was the center of town. All the kids had their jobs there after school or in the summertime. There was a movie theater, but it had like one movie that could play at any given time. But those summers, going to visit my grandmother in Connecticut, and this was a time where my cousin from Virginia would visit as well. And so and then my other cousins from Boston, and we'd all be there, the 5 of us. And we have so many shared childhood memories of waking up to the smell of waffles and bacon, or going to church. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher. So going to his church in Hartford on Main Street, Union Baptist Church, my grandmother with her peppermints in her purse and giving us the talk before service about how to behave so we wouldn't embarrass her, or going to the corner store after church with the money that perhaps we didn't put in the collection plate, watching movies together at home or playing outside in the backyard. And it was very different than my experience in Boston because it was so rural. So being able to hear and see animals like deer and rabbits and hearing crickets and birds, it was just very different than the city living of hearing children playing outside or sirens whizzing by. So it was always a magical, special treat for us growing up.
It's pretty magical. It does sound like it.
Oh, it was indeed. And then just thinking about how special grandparents are in the lives of their grandchildren and the lessons that they impart and the prayers that they throw up to God and the memories that they're able to create for their families and that legacy that they've left. And I've certainly have benefited from both sets of my grandparents, and I'm very, very blessed to have had amazing grandparents who on both sides were married for more than 50 years to their partners, and they just really poured so much into me and to all of my other cousins and siblings. So I feel very blessed to have had my childhood.
That's amazing. No, thank you so much for sharing those memories with us. I would love to shift gears into your professional journey from how you became the first Black mayor of Boston and now the CEO of EMPATH.
Yes, of EMPATH, Economic Mobility Pathways. It's a national nonprofit. We are headquartered here in Boston, and we are focused on economic mobility. We are working with families, with individuals who are experiencing poverty, who have low incomes and sometimes no incomes. And we are helping them through our direct service coaching approach. So we do direct service coaching, we do advocacy around systems change because we understand that these aren't individual problems, these are systemic problems. And we do research to understand what works best. And we share all of this out through a global learning network where 1,000 organizations are using our breakthrough tools to reach families in their own communities. And so we're really proud of this work. And what is remarkable about our organization as we celebrate 200 years this year is that while our name may have changed over the years, there were a few mergers along the way, perhaps the mission statement has been tweaked over time. But in all of that, there has been consistency, a constant commitment, a deep commitment to supporting women, to strengthening families, to amplifying the voices of women and helping them advance. And more than 40 years ago in my own journey, I came across my organization and I received support, services from this organization that I am now blessed to lead. And it was life-changing support that really helped me on my journey throughout my career as a community organizer, as an elected official, as a city councilor, and eventually as mayor of Boston, as the first person of color to lead the city, the first Black mayor, the first woman to lead our city, and blessed to be succeeded by another woman of color to lead Boston. But the journey, as I said, wasn't an easy journey. I was bused in childhood. I had other traumatic experiences like food insecurity and housing insecurity, violence that I experienced as a child. Though in all of that, family and community being so central to helping get beyond those things and have led me to where I am now. And so I'm blessed for not just family and community, but mentors who have been helpful along the way. I started doing community organizing work in the 1990s under the guidance of the Children's Defense Fund. And that was really important work. We, as young college students, we were charged with starting freedom schools in our home communities and doing that work. And I stayed grounded in that organizing advocacy space in large part because of my own lived experience, my own experience as a young single mom and trying to give my daughter the very best opportunities that I could to break cycles of poverty and trauma and violence. And so it was through that lens of being a young single mom that I got into this as a career choice. And I started doing community organizing work for a nonprofit here in Boston that was working on early childhood education issues. I then went on to another nonprofit working on education policy, K through 12. And it was from there that I had determined, and this would have been around 2016, 2017, that my community was at a crossroads and decided to run for public office. But it was all of those experiences growing up, those experiences as a young single mom, those work experiences as a community organizer and as an advocate, working on policy that helped inform my work in public office.
It's pretty amazing. It seems like advocacy is a pretty common thread
Yeah, I would say
for you.
so. And it's also just passed through the generations. In some regards, yes, my daughter is a big inspiration for that, but it's also, I think, in my blood. I've heard lots of stories growing up about my parents and the organizing work that they did as part of the civil rights movement here locally in Boston. My father worked with other students as a student at Northeastern. They led an effort to take over the president's office. And they had 10 demandments, and they were pushing for more diversity when it came to the faculty and making sure that they had professors that looked like them, that the content that they were learning about in terms of class material reflected their experiences. And they also wanted a safe space on campus to gather. And they were successful in getting some movement on all fronts. And probably most notable is the John D. O'Brien Center on campus, the African American Center, which is a result of that advocacy from the late 60s and 1970s. Originally, it was located in the Highland Park neighborhood of Roxbury in the Norfolk House. And when that building got built over by Ruggles, that's where they are now. And so I heard those stories. I heard stories of how family members, my family who were enslaved in the South, the American South, escaped slavery via the Underground Railroad and landed in Nova Scotia, Canada. And so in Nova Scotia, my great, great, great grandfather, Esau Janey, was active in the African Union Society and the Abolition Society there. And this is in the 1850s. So this is as slavery is still alive and well in the United States. This is before the end of the Civil War, and my great 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 grandfather is doing abolition work in Canada. And so, in some ways, it's in my blood. It's certainly in my own experiences and being a young mom, but this advocacy has been a thread throughout my entire life. And it's been something that has been passed down, I would say, through the generations.
Hmm. That's a really powerful thing to have that legacy. I would love to ask you, did you have an aha moment where you knew that you were called to run for elected office or to lead Impact?
So, empath, no, there wasn't, I don't think, an aha moment per se. And I say that because running for public office is something that I had to be pushed into. And they say that people who study this issue say that for women in particular, and I would, yes, um, it's probably even more so for women of color, that they have to be asked several times, that there are several barriers to running for office, whereas you would see men, especially white men, who haven't done anything more remarkable than graduate high school, and they were the president of the student council, so therefore they are ready to run for Congress. It's not like that for women. Women don't always see themselves, number one, as leaders. And so that's something that I try to encourage whenever I speak to young people, especially young women, that they do see themselves as leaders. But there's also a big financial burden to running for office. Increasingly, it's more and more expensive. And it's not just the money you have to raise to run a successful campaign, but it is the money that you have to have securely saved away in your bank account while you're running for office. So your bills still need to get paid. And for me, I was head of my own household, single adult, one income. If I stop working to run for office, who is going to pay my mortgage? That was a real consideration. So it probably took 20 years of pushing me to run, or longer than that. People used to ask or say to me, "Oh, you should run." Then it became, when are you going to run? But I think if there was an aha moment, it is probably that moment that I described earlier of realizing that my community was at a crossroads, that the income divide was getting wider and wider, that people who looked like me were being pushed out of my community, they were being left out of opportunity. And if we were going to do something, and I had already been doing something on the outside, doing organizing work and advocacy work and policy work. And I had to sit with myself and determine for myself whether I could be as or more effective going inside the system. And so I had to really have that conversation as part of, should I run for office to begin with, and determined that there was a unique position of being inside as a policymaker as opposed to being outside as an advocate trying to influence policy. And so I did run, and I think it was that realization that things are getting worse, not better, that people were being left out and pushed out. And I needed to take the advocacy that I had been doing inside and advocate from that position. And so that's what I did.
Thank you for sharing that. And also sharing some of the barriers as well when it comes to running for office. I'm sure there are many Black women who want to run and they have to contend with those issues. So thank you for shedding light on that.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. If you could summarize your experience from transitioning from the mayor to impact president in one sentence, what would it be?
Oh, I don't, there isn't one. I don't know. I would say this, not so much on the transition, is just like Empath has always supported women and have worked to advance women. I think my own career has shown this passion for my community and trying to strengthen my community, a focus on education, a focus on economic justice, a focus on quality of life issues and any kind of inequity or disparity that would hold folks back that are obviously rooted in policy. There's always been, whether the work or title has been community organizer, whether it's been director, whether it's been city councilor, city council president, mayor, president, CEO, whatever the title, that constant work to improve, to leave a place better than how you found it, to work on improving the life chances for children, on making my little corner of the world a better place for the next generation. That's always been a constant, no matter what title. And so I can't really describe what a transition has been because the work has always been consistent.
No, thank you for that. I would love to know that you are now the president and CEO of EMPATH. Can you talk about how you specifically service the community in that role?
So EMPATH is a national nonprofit that focuses on economic mobility. We know, if you want to talk about how does that impact people in the local area, locally we serve 1,400 individuals a year. They're all heads of their households as a family. So the reach is beyond the individual. It's really families. Some of the folks that we work with are unhoused. They're living in shelter with us. We are one of the Commonwealth's most trusted and respected family emergency shelter providers. But our work isn't shelter work, and we're not a housing organization. As I said, we're an economic mobility organization. So wherever you are coming to us, whether you're unhoused, whether you're living in public housing, we are helping people chart a path forward for themselves and their families through our coaching, through our advocacy, through our research, and through this global learning network that we have. We are constantly asking ourselves and trying to innovate how to improve our model, how to help people climb even higher. In our flagship program, we see participants graduate from that program. It's a 5-year intensive program. We see them graduate more than doubling their incomes, increasing their savings significantly, improving their credit scores, eliminating debt. Some folks that we are working with are in the process of purchasing their first home. And so this is life-changing work that can take someone from $18,000 a year to more than $50,000 a year in the time that we are working with them. And it's really centered upon this trusting relationship between our staff, our coach, and this family member. And the work of our coaching is really centered around this bridge. We have a bridge for economic mobility that understands that people's lives are multifaceted and that this issue of poverty is very complex in terms of how it impacts people's day-to-day lives. And so the bridge has 5 pillars. It looks at family stability. It looks at education and training. It looks at physical and mental health. It looks at finances. It looks at a range of issues that are interconnected. And so if someone is in shelter with us, and their goal, of course, is to get their own apartment, if they don't have the income to do that, it'll be very difficult. And if they need a higher income, do they have the right training? Do they need a certificate? Do they need a degree? Do they need some additional training? Do they have the childcare that they need? Do they have a social network? Is there stability there? All of those things are interconnected. And so we understand that, and we're trying to work with families to help them remove obstacles and barriers when they show up, and strategize around how to move forward with their goal setting. And so they are actively setting goals that move them closer and closer toward their objective in terms of what they are trying to achieve for themselves. And so we're part of that work on the ground, but we don't just stop there. We're sharing this work out through the Global Learning Network. And across the country, we have organizations and government agencies that are using this same approach. They're using our mobility mentoring coaching approach, and they're seeing success too. We're looking at data to make sure we're having the intended outcomes that we want to see. We're trying to learn more and grow and improve our practice in that regard. And we're not just in the States, we're probably represented in 12 international countries as well. And so this work is getting out and we want to share it widely. We want more and more people to have it because we know it's working. And we're testing it with a randomized controlled trial. We've been partnering with Harvard and MIT and working with the Boston Housing Authority and the Cambridge Housing Authority. And so some folks who are enrolled will get 3 years of this coaching approach. And then the other folks who are in the control group, they will get the basic services that they get from living in public housing. They don't get the coaching, and they're going to study the results. And we hope that the results will show what we know to be true, is that this is an effective tool to help people move up the economic ladder. And we don't want to stop there. We want to help people live out their wildest dreams, whether locally in Massachusetts or anywhere across the country. Sadly, despite a war on poverty launched in the 1960s, here we are more than 50 years later with some of the worst stats when it comes to child poverty, and particularly as we look at other so-called developed countries, and it's shameful. It is shameful. And so we're trying to do our part, our work, to change that.
Absolutely. And sounds like such powerful work that you guys are
It
doing.
is, and it is. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and lift up that many of the women that we are working with are women of color. They're heads of their own households. They often have to work twice as hard for half the recognition, for half the money. We haven't even gotten into gender pay gaps. We haven't talked about what that means for Black women and Latino women. When we think about these wage gaps, on average, a Black woman, there's a gap of $1 million over the course of their careers in terms of earning potential that is left on the table that they don't get, that white men do get. So after working 40 years, they would have earned $1 million more than either of us would have earned. And so there is so much work to do to close these gaps. I think about whether it's leading a nonprofit, whether I think about our elections, running for office, or just making sure people vote, there is something to be said for Black women and the role that they play in their communities. And they are always leading, whether from in front or behind, in their churches, in their families, on the job. And thank God, thank God. But I would say this, while I always applaud a woman and she's got her cape and her crown is on straight, and yes, Black women are superheroes, yes, Black women are magic, but we're also human, and the importance of taking care of ourselves. Again, we take care of everyone, whether it's our families, people on our job, people in our church, people in our sorority, you name it, it's exhausting. And who is taking care of us? And we often put ourselves last on that list. And I am here to tell anyone who is listening that they have to put themselves at the front of the line.
Thank you for that, because that
Absolutely.
absolutely shifts into my next question.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It shifts into, you are an extremely busy woman yourself. So what does
Oh, perfect segue. There it
yes,
is. Let's talk about the
yep,
self-care, Deidre.
what does it look like for you?
It's an ongoing work in progress. So it's easy to say these things. It's another thing to actualize these things. And so I encourage wherever possible for Black women, for women in general, to support each other, to build friendships with each other, to have that circle that you can go to who will let you vent, will let you cry, but who will also tell you the truth. So you don't want just the yes circle. When you need to deal with your stuff, you need to have a place where people will tell you need to go deal with your stuff. But it is so important that we have that network, that we have that place that we can go. It's also important that we just take the time to slow down. I think there is, for many women, but especially Black women who have had to do everything all the time for everyone, if for some reason you're not doing that, you feel off, like, what's going on? Or you feel lazy or guilty around taking time. No, you have to take the time. And whatever that looks like for you, like people have to define that for themselves. For some people, maybe they'll want to get a massage. Maybe some people like to travel. Maybe some people need to read a book. Some people are into yoga. Whatever that release is for you, you need to figure that out and build that in. It can't be an afterthought. If I have more time, I'll do this. No, I'm going to prioritize this. Physical health, taking walks, being active, very, very important. And then whatever you do to replenish your soul that is beyond that respite of short periods of time. So if you need longer periods of time to get a weekend getaway, if you need to pour in terms of having a mentor, having someone pour into you, whatever those things that really care for who you are as a whole person, it's so important that we prioritize that. We see the mortality gap and we see the issues that affect Black women, whether we're talking about high rates of breast cancer and more aggressive forms of breast cancer and later detections. We're talking about Black maternal health. If we're talking about gender, you talk about whatever the issue is, we tend to not be, because of systemic discriminatory problems around policy that are often rooted in racism, the health outcomes aren't going to be good and all this. So if we're not taking stock of that and taking care of ourselves and demanding that others do better by us as well, then we'll continue to repeat the cycle. And so that self-care is going to look different for different people, but it has to be prioritized. It has to be prioritized. And I would say if a daily basis, and if you can't figure that out, build something in on a weekly basis. Every Friday afternoon, I'm going to go on a walk in this area. I'm going to listen to my book that I hadn't finished. I'm going to reach out and talk to this person who I hadn't heard from in a while and want to rekindle a relationship. I'm going to be proactively thinking about my career and who might be helpful in that journey. And I'll also be thinking about who I might help along the way. And so I think it is just important for us to be intentional about these things and to prioritize, especially the self-care. It's just so, so important. And at any given turn, like wherever you go, there are messages that are telling you that you're not enough and that there's something wrong with you rather than the system. And so that wears on folks, that wears on folks. And so it's really important that we prioritize ourselves. You know, we hear it all the time when we're on the airplane, when the flight attendant is going over the safety instructions, the importance on putting your mask on first before you try to help others. And there's a reason for that. It's because you're no good to anyone else if you haven't taken care of yourself. So I encourage anyone who is listening to please prioritize self-care.
Yes, thank you for that. That is so important, self-care, because like you said, we tend to take on the world, but we also have to learn how to put the cape down and
Absolutely.
take a rest for ourselves. And
That's
yeah.
absolutely right. Mhm.
So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
So one of the things you talked about is building community. And being that this is a show about Black women saving the world, are there like maybe who are your three top Black women mentors who have saved your life on a personal or professional level?
Oh, I can't limit it to three, Deidre. No, 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 no. So I talked about my grandmothers and how instrumental they are. I've had mentors along the way. If I were to focus, I guess, on names that your listening audience might be familiar with, I would name people like Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Jo Baker, I would name Angela Davis, so many folks. I think Daisy Bates. There are so many folks who have come before us that I think they're a lot to learn from. If I looked at more current day folks, I would certainly throw Stacey Abrams into the mix there. The good news in all of this is that there is no shortage of women to lift up and to highlight. Oh, Beyonce. I didn't say Beyonce.
Yes.
I listen to Cowboy Carter for
Me
2 weeks
too.
straight,
Yes.
non-stop.
Yes.
So
Great
I'm kind of
album.
now in my little detox phase of it. I haven't really listened too much this week, but the last since Good Friday, if I were looking at more modern day. But so like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, oh my God, these women just incredible, as well as our modern day heroes and queens who are just doing incredible. Diana Ross, and then folks on the front line of our movement today. There are a number of women who are on the front line of our movement today, and they all, I hope, are taking care of themselves, because just doing incredible work, whether for the movement for Black lives or just economic justice and everything that we are experiencing as a people, and have always been our own saviors. That is the thing here. This isn't about waiting on somebody to come save us, and it's certainly not some white savior out there. We are about the business of saving ourselves, lifting up our own communities. And women have always been at the forefront of this work, of these movements. And so many, especially Black women. I love the whole framing of the podcast and what you are doing to lift up the voices and amplify women. So thank you, Deidre. I'll add Deidre to this list.
Oh, thank you. And you're definitely on my list for
Well,
sure,
thank you. I
along with a
appreciate
long list of
you.
ladies,
Thank
including my
you.
mom and everyone.
Exactly.
I know it's a hard question.
Yeah, to
Um,
narrow it down as you can.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
hard.
it's
It's
too
really
many.
hard. But I would love to know, you've accomplished so much personally and professionally. What is next on your list to accomplish?
I am about staying focused on the work. I think there's certainly plenty of that. These issues are persistent. They are embedded into our systems, whether, policy at a government level or how nonprofits respond. So I am right now enjoying this season of my life and not worried about what's next at this point. The work has always been what drives me. I'd love to spend more time with family. I'm at a great place in terms of my grandchildren and the things that they're doing. And so whenever I can, I try to spend time with them as well. But this is a wonderful season. And so I'm focused on the here and now.
I think that's important too, just
Hmm.
staying present in the moment. So thank
Exactly.
you for that. What is your advice for Black girls and young Black women who may want to follow your footsteps or inspired by your journey?
You know
Wh-
what? Excellent, excellent question. If I could reach back and talk to my young self and all of that, it is so important for young Black girls in particular to love themselves and appreciate who they are in this world. And so whenever I see a little Black girl, I just have to love up on her. I have to tell her how pretty she is, how smart she is, how beautiful her hair is. You're just brilliant. I have to love up on little Black girls because, again, this world is constantly telling you that the standard is this and you're not that. Even though we want to emulate every single attribute you have, but it's not you, but it's this. And so the world is constantly telling you you're not good enough. You got to work twice as hard to get half the pay. And so I think this pouring into young children, Black girls and Black boys, is so critically needed. And if there's advice to impart, it is one, helping them see how they are connected to the broader world, helping them understand their own contributions in terms of their ancestors and their people. It is trusting themselves. To grown women, trust yourself, trust your gut. Your gut is that thing that is telling you. And there are too many times when women push that inner voice down for whatever reason. They push it down, they don't listen to it. And it's there for a reason. So to trust yourself, to believe in yourself, to love yourself, and to let folks know that they've got this, that they've got this. Just so, so important. And so I try to not just impart words, I try to show it. So I mentor young women whenever I can, whether they are women who worked for me, just people I've encountered throughout my career. I keep in touch with them. Young girls, I told you how I have to love up on young girls. It's just so important. And in doing so, I'll tell you a quick funny story. I was in North Carolina this past weekend, and I was doing just this. Little girl, loving up on her. And I asked her the question because I wanted to see if she knew the lyrics to the Beyonce video. And I was like, who runs the world? See if she was going to say girls. And she said girls. Her brother was right there. Hey, what about boys? I had to say, yes, and boys too. Boys too. Oh, yeah. Just the believing in yourself, the loving yourself, the trusting yourself. I think if I had to narrow it down to 3, but what I would say to all of us, it's not so much what we say, it's what we do. And so I try to live that. I don't want to just hear some advice, but I try to show up that way to young people in particular. But
Thank you
great
for
question. Thank
that.
you, Deidre.
Thank you. And I guess my last question is, in this season of life for you, whether personal or professionally, how are you saving the world as a Black woman?
Oh, just by doing my little part. That's all. And knowing when to take the cape off and put the crown down, like to get that rest, but just doing my part because that's all we can do. So whether it's through the work I do in my day job, which it certainly is, but it's also just embedded in who I've been as a person. So it's also how I spend my time and my resources, because it's not just your time, it's your treasure and your talent on helping and supporting other folks, particularly those who have been left out. So it's what I try to do every day.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Pam.
Deidre. This has been a delight. It's been wonderful to connect with you and your listener. I hope it's been enjoyable and that folks got something out of it.
Wow, what an impactful episode today. Special thanks to Kim Janey for sharing your journey and story with us. You truly are a Black woman who saves the world. If you loved today's episode, then don't forget to subscribe to my podcast and never miss an episode. Feel free to comment as well. Also, don't forget to check out our various social media channels, including our Instagram and YouTube account at Black Women Save the World. Tune in to the next podcast episode for my interview with Endless Flair Events founder and CEO, Aisha James. It's an interview I'm sure you won't want to miss. Thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you next time.